Hello, and welcome to the realm of ideas is free to all and it's real. These days, that last piece that's been added recently with the great advice of Mr. Spock seems more important and more deliberate as time goes on, unfortunately. Because I believe the public realm is probably the last bastion of what we'll be talking about. Because I believe that a lot of places have basically kind of fallen. It was never the intention of this show or this program, these ruminations. These are ruminations on my work and my ideas along with Julie. And it was never the intention for them to become political. But then again, I never expected politics, which is usually like the forum of retards and dimwits, people who failed at everything else. I mean, politics always seemed very simple to me. Keep the lights on, make the buses run, keep the streets clean and safe. Simple shit. But unfortunately, we've kind of foregone that for these other things that have basically created some of the things that basically threaten even the existence of what I thought was the essential aspects of what made this country great. In a few weeks, we'll be celebrating the 250th anniversary of this great nation. You don't have to like it, but you have to accept it. The United States is here. It's been here for 250 years, and it's made a mark that will live throughout history, of course, if we survive. So as a result, I think it's important that we understand what that means. Anyway, with that said, the title for today's program is clearly Stay Free First. And that may sound simple, and maybe it is, but it's not as easy as it used to be. One of the things I've always remembered and always felt really great and always appreciated about my country was I was free. And what I mean by that is like part of two different things. I mean more, not just the existential aspect of freedom, which we've talked about. It's the social liberty, the ability to have the ability to move about without impairment, to speak without impairment, without concern. And that as a result, that's the place which has always been the great aspect of this country. Now, one of the, let's say, the pedestrian aspect of freedom is that one has the right to stand in the middle of a public square and just rant aimlessly. Anybody can do that. But as a result of allowing that to happen, what is also allowed to happen is that the realm of public intellection in the public square is that individuals find what's essential and necessary to say. When I was a critic, when I was an architectural professor, for me that was the same thing. I felt it was essential to say, to understand with any particular circumstance, what was that which was most important, that needed to be understood and needed to be explained or expressed, right? Dealing with whatever was under review. I took that very seriously because I thought it was a very, very meaningful endeavor. And in spite of the fact that at times it wasn't appreciated because of the emotional frailty of a lot of people, it was something that we understood. We've talked the last couple of weeks. Hi, Julie.
Hi, we should probably introduce ourselves.
Yes, I'm Bruce Gamble.
After you're done.
And go ahead, tell us who you are, P.
Well, we would like to say hello. I don't want to interrupt you.
Say
to all of our many new subscribers. And
first to our
yes, we would like to thank our wonderful sponsor, Tees Tea.
Here we're having a refreshing mint.
I just got the mint. They're really hard to find.
Place in the corner got them.
Yeah, they got them for us.
We love them.
I bought 7
and
7. And yes, so I'm Julie Rauer. This is Bruce Gemmel. We're co-founders of Art Science Complex.
And our international correspondent, Penguin.
Yes. She's up for the Pulitzer.
She's shortlisted.
Yes, because she's short.
Right.
She's low to the ground or low
Mhm.
to the wind.
Yeah. Again, and the thing is, we talked about how, the people who become politicians are people who are kind of like,
Mhm.
just like gym teachers are people who kind of couldn't teach basic subjects. Teachers are people who can't get real jobs, and
Mhm.
politicians are people who really can't do the same. Are just morons. I mean, keep the lights on, keep the buses running, keep the streets safe and clean. Simple stuff. Simple stuff.
You would think.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to
So-
send a greeting.
Yes. Send a greeting, my love.
So we've hit an art science complex landmark. We now have over 400 subscribers, which is great because we're not doing shoes or celebrity divorces or cats and alligators becoming unlikely friends. We're about ideas and concepts. So
Should do that.
yeah, it's great.
I love I love dog and cat videos when the little kitten and the I
Of
love
course,
those.
they're super cute. But
Yeah.
anyway, so we have over 20 new subscribers in 2 days.
It's crazy.
Yeah, which is really great. So
Thanks
I
to
wanted
Julie.
you're welcome. I think that my new drawing inspired a lot of people to climb on board the magic hot air balloon that is Art Science Complex. So
That's refreshing. Just what I need after a really difficult.
Oh my goodness!
There's also Julie's achievement this week comes on the heels of an incredibly, overwhelmingly traumatic and difficult week, to say the least, if not more.
Not to mention the twin earthquakes in Caracas and the now third earthquake in Japan. It was a busy day on Wednesday. Let's put it
Wednesday
that way.
was not my favorite day.
No, it wasn't.
But I mean, I survived. I'm on the mend. I unfortunately missed the Met this weekend, both Friday and Saturday.
Everyone
I said hi to my. Want to just say hi to all my friends there. It was tough to miss.
And hi, Frank.
Hey, Frank.
So yeah.
Hey, Frank. Hey, Mr. Spock.
Oh yes. I'd like to say quickly what we love to eat on our Art Science Complex podcast, along with our Tease Tea, is Choco Love's 77% extra strong dark chocolate. Now, here is some fun art and science. You're healing up well, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not so bad.
No, it's healing well, actually.
It's a bruise, though.
Well, yeah, you are a little bruised.
Okay.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Finish what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay. So here's something really fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
When one looks at why 77% cacao, this is actually the Goldilocks zone of cacao content. This is fascinating. This is one of those wonderful things where you can find a fascination in the most unlikely of places. In this case, the Goldilocks zone is exactly both gastronomically and scientifically the just right spot.
Interesting.
Yes, exactly. Wait till you find out why. This is actually mind-blowing. So it is the sweet spot in terms of sugar, meaning you will get both the fruity and the floral notes of the cacao bean, which is really, really important, versus the bitterness ratio when you start climbing over 80%, 85%. By the time you hit 90, it's like brown chalk. I mean, it tastes absolutely awful because you cannot have that palate melt. It's like sandy chalk. Now, the texture has just enough cocoa butter at 77 to melt on the palate and avoids that powdery, chalky, or as we say, cotton mouth feel. So now it also avoids the candy trap, which is anything less than 70 for all of those who want to get all the antioxidant health benefits, of which there are many. If you go under 70, it becomes candy. It's full of milk. Milk chocolate is not what you want. You don't want milk. It is a filler. And in this number, you've got only 23% sugar, 77% cacao. So this is actually very low in sugar, interestingly. Now, here is what will blow your mind. Theobromine. Now, you probably go to bed every night saying, I wonder what theobromine is up to.
We went to high school together.
See, it is for mood enhancement and basically gentle alertness. And why? It's not caffeine. It's very different. It's a totally different substance. The half-life of theobromine is higher than caffeine. Its metabolic uptake in the body totally different. And lastly, it has something called PEA for cardiometabolic health. And what they've just found, this is useful in treating asthma, respiratory tract infections, coughs, and lung diffusion. So this is actually a respiratory powerhouse. And who knew? I mean, that's pretty interesting. There's a lot of science.
Right.
Yes.
What's new in Julie?
Oh, yes, sure.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd love to see the drawing.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So
You just talk.
how did this topic come about?
Yeah.
Like I said, there have been many times where I've talked about things that are related to my ideas in my work and Julie's ideas in her work. And most of those things basically were kind of things that were principles of the way in which we saw the world as a result of the work that we do. All right, so here we go. Now, again, we have on our end, we're still having technical difficulties.
Yeah.
But it's not translating into the video.
Yes.
The video is clean.
Yeah.
So we're very happy with that.
Yeah, we're having some RGB screen resolution issues, but that's our screen. Our camera is top drawer and doesn't seem to be a problem in the taping. The playback was fine. We're just seeing a barbershop of candy stripes here, but I think we are good. So this is what I did. This is basically almost finished. I basically just have to sign it on Friday. I did this at the Met for those of us, for those of you who are our new subscribers. You saw this, and I will explain a little bit. The title is Nightfall of Grand Witloof, and that's one of those crazy Belgian words that basically means white gold or Queen of Belgian endives. And that is a Belgian endive here with its very long characteristic tap root, which is very elvish and very gnome-like. And when it is grown, it is forced into a 2-year life cycle. In the wild, it has a 3 to 4 year life cycle. Yeah. So you want to zoom in close? Thank you, P. And so basically, it is planted in the ground, and it shoots up these huge dark green heads of leaves, and then it's decapitated en masse, French Revolution style. It's kind of a gruesome thing. And then the farmers harvest just the roots, which is, thank you, quite a bizarre turn, holes these beds of roots inside, builds these shallow wooden trays, and keeps them for a year, covers them with blankets or metal sheeting, and forces them to regrow in the pitch dark. So it's an artificial night, which is why I used the Creatures of the Night Chinese cloisonné piece with the bats on the right of my drawing. And then it is introduced, what?
Jaw.
Sinus.
Yeah, sinuses are killing me.
I know. Sorry,
so here,
P. That's all sinus.
Yeah.
The pollen and the mold are through the roof. Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
So, and then, like I said, it is basically a bizarre artificial day. So the seasons are created by a human hand that are running counter to the actual life cycle of the plant, which is 3 to 4 years in the wild. So I built a furnace into the back of the rooster, which is actually an incense burner. So it is most apropos, and its entire wing, in a brilliant move, comes off. I mean, it's really great. It's on the 3rd floor of the Chinese wing, which is back open after a couple months. And there we have it. On to you, P.
Okay. So
Yeah, sure.
stay
I'll put
free
this back.
first.
Yes.
It became something I thought was necessary to talk about just because of the way in which, kind of circumstances kind of engage reality at the present time. And I think that, as a result, it was important to kind of speak about it. So criticism, we talked about that as a kind of fundamental kind of relationship between that which we do as rational people and the things that we do in that regard. Anyway, so why free first? Because I don't think there's anything more fundamental to the meaningful life. I had because I've been kind of housebound the last couple of days as a result of a kind of unfortunate kind of mishap with my my bicycle. I kind of have been kind of hobbled. Today was my first day to kind of be a little bit around.
We're out
But
and about, just
yeah,
a little.
a little bit, yeah.
In
But anyway,
a Japanese way.
I was fortunate enough to kind of see. I was just watched Failsafe, which I've kind of watched probably 100 times. I think it's a brilliant film.
One of your favorite films.
Absolutely, it's a brilliant film about the idea of kind of what it is that makes the possibility for potential disaster and what it is that you kind of think you're engaged in. Anyway, I think it was a kind of film that showed the complexity of life and the idea that there were things that were kind of credibly, potentially overwhelming. And I think that was the kind of thing that kind of was the message that the Cold War had to reason with, was the fact that the circumstance that we had built was capable of becoming incredibly overwhelming at any particular time. And I think when you look back on that history from 1945 to 1990, which we would kind of say would be a specific portion of the Cold War, we were incredibly fortunate to not accidentally destroy ourselves. With that said, I was also watching an interview with Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt is someone I've always deeply respected. I don't know her work as well as I should, but she wrote a lot about totalitarianism. And I think one of the things she's probably most known for is her analysis of Eichmann, one of the masterminds of Nazi Germany.
Do we have that book in our library?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
And she talked about the idea of banality of evil. And in fact, what was interesting is actually the term mastermind is kind of like a misnomer, is kind of incorrect. It's a misnomer because, in fact, he wasn't a mastermind. He was actually very banal. She talked about the banality of evil. But I think she also talked about the complexity of the fact that even some certain complicity amongst the Jewish community leaders who felt that there was a possibility that if one was to give 100, one could save 1,000. But at the same time, the idea that understanding that some had to be sacrificed to save them, to save the rest, was a concept that kind of showed a complexity of the circumstance. Now, I believe there are still good and bad, but I think today we have kind of put this conversation to such hyperbolically insane levels where the idea of absolute purity and absolute evil in an almost comic book sense seems to kind of rule the day. And it just seems absolutely disgustingly kind of ridiculous to me, because nothing is like that. And there has to be a desire to kind of not deal with reality, to kind of see oneself as the kind of the pinnacle of virtue and kind of and morality. I don't think anyone is that pure or should ever state to be that pure, nor should their intentions be stated as that pure. We have to understand the complexity of circumstance. Mm-hmm. So with that said, I remember someone when I was a boy, there was a politician that came to the street and he was on his soapbox and saying all these great things. And, I was just a boy and I was kind of swept up in it. And I remember kind of at the end, I was just excited. And this old man kind of looked at me. He's like, "So you really fell for that?" I said, "He's going to do great things. He's this and that." He's like, "He said this and he's that." He goes, "So he live in our block?" "No." "See the car he drives?" It's like, "No, I didn't." It's like he's here to convince you to take his side so he can benefit from what we have. And when I was finished talking to this person, who was actually a World War II veteran in the Marines from Iwo Jima, he had understood the reality of the relationship between human reality and politics. And I've always remembered that. And I remember, like, in the 60s, it was always that saying, never trust anyone over 30, which I remember recently telling to a new friend. So with that said, it was always kind of curious when, we had to worry about someone substituting or kind of giving us the lure of substituting something for our freedom or our social liberty. That's, so
Okay.
anyway. So with that said, yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I do have more to say on that.
No, I do, but I mean, I'm
Okay,
going to
yeah.
intersperse it as we go.
Okay,
Yeah.
Let me bring this back to the science, because this has quite a connection, and I'm glad that you ended on that, because quite a lure and the art of fraud and deception is exactly what I'm going to talk about now. Because it is rampant in the scientific world, it is rampant in the insect world, and it is rampant in the plant world. And I believe that we can cast a lucid eye much more effectively on the very vital ideas that my colleague Bruce has just laid out for all of you, by some really key analogies in the natural world, one of which I'm going to strike right now. Pseudo flowers. No one I've spoken to knows what these are, so I'm going to tell all of you. It's also known as floral fraud, basically a soapbox fungus which has far more skill sets than this man in Bruce's old neighborhood on a soapbox. Anyway, I am going to illuminate you all and share this recently discovered fungus, and no one quite knows who discovered it. It is called Fusarium xerophyllum, and Fusarium xerophyllum is native to the savannas in Guyana and infects a yellow-eyed grass, a Xyris species of plants, which has about 55 species, all native to the African savanna. This fungus has the remarkable ability to thoroughly hijack its host plant, sterilize its host plant, so the plant can never reproduce. So the plant can't actually make its own pollen and have the dispersal of its pollen. Okay. And force it to grow a fungal mimic or pseudo flower. So a pseudo flower is a fungus that is masquerading in a brilliant way down to the last chemical scent as a real flower. So this fungal fraudster looks and smells, this is absolutely remarkable, identical to a real flower. Now, we aren't talking a generic scent of any flower. I'm talking the specific scent of this group of flowers, which is radically different from the generalized way that a human will partake of a masquerade. It's incredibly generalized. Look at Halloween. I mean, someone will put on a costume and there'll be a cat, or say a mongoose, or a bar of soap. And they will do it in the way. They are a general bar of soap. There'll be a clown, not a specific clown, a generalized clown, or say a vampire, no one in particular, just one of the undead. But the point is, this is very specific. So it doesn't just fool one type of insect, it fools a diverse array of insects. Now, insects are incredibly smart, so this is a brilliant stroke. It fools bees, ants, wasps, moths, butterflies, and katydids. So all of these insects have very different habits, and it's pretty amazing. With a term that I'd like to introduce you all to that humans are not very good at, but fungus and plants are excellent at, called active deception, as opposed to passive deception. Passive deception is when one sits and waits with some kind of a costume or some kind of a masquerade for passersby to notice it. This is extremely active. It's not just proactive, it's kinetic, like jumping bean active. So what it does is it engages in structural mimicry and produces a palette of pigments that imitate the bright yellow orange of this yellow-eyed flower, which is rather amazing. And I won't get into the name, but for those of you who are very much into the science, it's an 8-O-methyl bastricodin. It's a kind of a pigment, and it's specific to this flower. Now, here's the great part: chemical lures. It creates, the fungus, a volatile organic compound called 2-ethylhexanol. Why is this amazing? Because it makes the fungus smell exactly like the yellow-eyed grass that it is impersonating. And it sterilizes all the grass, so not a single grain of pollen is produced by the grass. And all the spores that are carried away and dispersed by the unknowing insects are the fungal spores. And how do we know this? DNA evidence. This is great. So the discoveries that are most recent on the research are flooring. The DNA was confirmed. The fungus DNA was confirmed on every single insect. Now, that is amazing. Not just that, but the identical chemical aroma and a UV reflective profile, meaning an intense ultraviolet fluorescence is created, which is incredibly appealing to bees, which are their primary vector for the pollination. And this appeals to what are called trichromatic insects, like bees and butterflies. And I will end here with an evolutionary appetizer, or I will say an evolutionary amuse-bouche, which is that they are a clade of hucksters, meaning this fungus comes from an ancient clade of hucksters where they have all developed this ability to fool the primary vectors.
Interesting.
Ever since this fungus has existed, it's been doing this.
Interesting.
How great is that?
That's pretty impressive. In fact, it brings up something that I was kind of, when I was looking back and reviewing some of the things I saw on the Banality of Evil. And one of the things I came across was, in terms of other things that Hannah Arendt spoke about in her other work, she talked about loneliness as a kind of like certain palpable reality towards the way in which banality kind of becomes enlisted. And she talked about the fact that totalitarian regimes will always fail, but at the same time, the mentality by which they can be enlisted and that their ability to generate like weeds or kind of fraudulent things will always be potential. And I think one of the things she spoke about was that loneliness and the incapacity to do things or think for yourself is something that has a potential to be enlisted as minions. And some of these minions actually get to fairly high places as they kind of feel as if they can be effective. So I think if there was a value to Eichmann, Eichmann's value was his effectiveness.
That's an interesting word.
Effectiveness?
No, a value to a monster like.
Well, I mean,
Eichmann.
again, what's interesting is like Hannah Arendt expected to kind of see some crazy, kind of like froth making.
He was
zealot.
A very dull.
He was an
little
ordinary
bureaucrat.
man. He was an ordinary
dull,
man.
Actually,
yeah, he was
dull.
He was a very ordinary man.
Yeah.
But the point was, he had a certain ability to effectively kind of do logistical things for unspeakable evil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that she speaks about is that the antidote to loneliness, or the antidote to totalitarian kind of like festering, is having a life of meaning. So in a way, bringing us back to where we are, right? Stay free first.
Mm-hmm.
If one stays free for a purpose. That purpose is to do something meaningful. So that's basically the antidote. One of the things that's interesting is one of the kind of precedents or circumstance one has to be wary of is when people try to cut down the individual freedoms, because when the individual freedoms happen, there initially will be a kind of turmoil of people kind of like, wrestling against the shackles, but eventually over time that disappears. The other thing is you become complacent to the existence of not ever having had freedom. I was fortunate enough in 1990 to visit the Soviet Union, and it was amazing to me because the Russians are a passionate, sentimental, emotionally strong, vibrant people, and I've always loved the Russians. And I feel as if they're deeply connected to me. But at the time, that sense of the fact that so many people had kind of lost that fervor for passion for their work, for passion for anything other than just to kind of stay ahead of this grim reaper of totalitarian kind of turmoil that was ready to strike at any moment. Everyone was turned against each other. Everyone was turned against anything of consequence. Consequence was basically something that if it wasn't sanctioned, you didn't dare do it. The idea of the independent person off on his own, doing his own thing, was one of the main differences that I noticed between myself and my colleagues in the Soviet Union. They remarked, and they would always say, "You mean you can just do this? You can just do that?" It's like, yeah. And they were astounded. They were astonished. They were like, they just thought, so stay free first. People will offer you lures, but these lures are dangerous, right? During COVID, we were saying, stay safe, stay safe. Then when you didn't, if you maybe said, oh yeah, I'm good. Then they kind of started to tighten a little bit, saying like, well, you better do the safe thing. So it became a kind of thing like, well, you better get a vaccine. You better do this. Mm-hmm. And it soon became a kind of like, we are using safety as a way to create a dependency. We're using it as a way to kind of like stop us from ever kind of having our own, our own freedom. So for my feeling is, I will decide when I need to be safe, but I will first make sure that above all else, I'm free. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to mention when one exercises the freedom of their individual mind in an age that is fundamentally unreceptive to the way their mind works. And this is something that, I certainly come up against all the time. But I'd like to bring up the French classical composer Eric Satie, because he's an excellent example of a very free mind, one who basically made very strong associations with really nothing else of his day. And he was quite a pariah as he slunk around the back alleys and streets of Paris. And basically, he composed mostly works for the piano, just the piano, the solo works. I have his complete recordings. He was obviously pressured to try his hand at a few chamber pieces, which are pretty unsuccessful, like one or two symphonic works, which are brutal. And that was not the way Satie thought. His Gnossiennes, his gymnopédies were meditative, futuristic, otherworldly, and surreal. It is as if you are growing a garden backwards in slow motion. When you listen to his pieces, they conjure the most phantasmic thoughts. Nothing of a symphonic scale. They were intimate, they were urgent, and they were not of his age. So the freedom of Satie's mind was really stamped down in that really very few of his pieces were performed in his lifetime. And for years and years and years afterwards, in fact, there's a very interesting independent film called Satie and Suzanne. I hope I'm getting that title right. I only have seen clips of it on the wonderful show Classic Arts Showcase, which I urge everyone to watch. It's just great. I mean, you'll see exceedingly rare clips from opera, from the ballet, and the Satie piece had a surrealist interpretation. I'm not sure who the director was. I think they were British, actually. And it was like being inside a Max Ernst painting of Satie's pieces as he swam through walls and rose up through a cafe floor and bloomed like a fungus that was hijacking a plant. I mean, it's a really intense film. I'd love to see the rest. But when one exercises the freedom of their own mind, I mean, his mind was very exacting. It was truly odd. It was nimble. It was very, very compulsive, very, very obsessive. He was obsessed with Suzanne Valadon, an artist, model, and a painter in her own right. She moved into the building. Really, really bad idea. He drove her away. He spent the rest of his life writing love letters to her that were probably never read, and he was never with anybody else. She moved out as soon as she possibly could. But the idea is this kind of obsession can be heard in every single note of Satie's compositions. And that was not a popular thing. That kind of raw psychology was not popular in a lush symphonic age.
Well, again,
do you understand?
No, I totally agree. Because I think what's interesting was, people always talk about the difference between, the communism and capitalist societies. And I don't really think that it's really a proper comparison, because what happens is, when we talk about communist societies, we always talk about, the reality is that they fail. And as a result, that oppression kind of like takes itself out on the people in very kind of like vicious and kind of cruel ways. And I think it's, you can analyze the principles, but I mean, at the end of the day, we haven't really seen a situation where we have a successful circumstance that we can say, oh, this was a great time. Like I said, as an individual who kind of looks for the opportunity to do what I feel intellectually to engage in, regardless of sanction, regardless of kind of like concurrence by any outside authority. This was nothing. This is something I had never concerned myself with, and I lived in a place where people was like, "Oh man, leave him to himself." It was kind of one where it's not something minor, to just kind of not take into account. It was discouraged, and then eventually it was criminalized. So anyone who was too far afield from what could be appreciated, and as people became more and more paranoid, less and less becomes tolerated. So as less and less becomes tolerated, you have both that loss and lack of that kind of like, oh, let them be. And eventually, it becomes a concern. I've seen these tyrannies start to kind of reproduce themselves over here. And, interesting, what Julie gives us a really great analogy of these kind of circumstances as how they exist in nature.
Thank you.
I don't think we as humans kind of make them up. We simply kind of have them as part of our DNA. The difference is we hope that as we kind of like create societies, that part of the creation of those societies is to basically protect us from some of these natural tendencies that we have, which is why we create laws. So I think that's something that kind of becomes a benefit to a society where traditions kind of manifest themselves as culture. And I think that that's the kind of thing that I kind of see kind of like under attack. Anyway.
This is a ringing example of a freedom and a voice stamped out. I'd like to talk about Laurence Sterne because I mentioned this in the preview, and this is really a critical example of what has been going on. For those of you who don't know Laurence Sterne, he was an author, quite a prolific one, known best for Tristram Shandy, which is a raucous, bawdy, comic, satirical megalith doorstop of a novel. It's quite huge. We have several copies. If you have a lot of time and a rapier wit, he is for you. Sadly, he was not for many of his day, including the church. Now, why is this really key? Because, and in a jaw-dropping turn, Laurence Sterne was an ordained clergyman. You heard that right.
Did I hear that right?
Yes, you did. The entire time that Sterne wrote his satirical prose, his pamphlets, he not only was highly critical of the church that he was a part of, which doesn't go well. See, the thing about speaking your mind and being a free voice, it is doubly or triply or quadruply hard when your voice is coming from within an organization of which you are an intrinsic part. I mean, Sterne was not outside on some, sunny, secluded mount looking at the church. He was in the church. And even more so, Sterne knew what it was intimately that he wrote about so effectively, which is why he wrote about it so effectively. So what happened to Laurence Sterne, whose really amazing bust you can see in the British Wing at the Met, and you will note that's our cover piece, is Bruce's excellent, searing portrait drawing of Laurence Sterne from the marble bust at the Met. So Sterne's ecclesiastical and public career, his reputation, his private life were eradicated. I mean, in the most brutal way. He was permanently halted. His career imploded. His social standing was derailed as punishment for his satirical writings and wholly justified critiques of the church. At the time, there was scandal after scandal, cloaked politics. There were more politics in the church than in the government. And in fact, in many cases, the church was the government. So Sterne now left the church impoverished. He was banished from his social circles, his work, advancement. And I mean, in the church, if you don't advance, you're basically like, a monk wearing a horsehair shirt. I mean, you don't really. So there was a suppression of his work in two phases, and these are wrenching. Phase one was Stern wrote a pamphlet which was very brave in support of his immediate superior in the church, meaning Stern was defending, I believe it was a bishop. So Stern was an Anglican clergyman in Yorkshire in 1759. I'm giving you the specifics because when you are talking about the curtailment of freedom, nothing drives a point home more than specifics. So he was dragged into an infernal, volatile local dispute amongst church officials in Yorkshire. Stern jumped in and defended his dean by penning a now famous booklet, quite satirical. I love the title. I think we should call a story after it. I'm going to call a drawing a political romance, because there is nothing of a romance in politics, and you shouldn't have politics in a romance. This was a satirical pamphlet which mercilessly mocked the internal politics of the church. His punishment came from the Archbishop of York, which was a pretty high standing, who was incredibly embarrassed by Stern's airing the abundant dirty laundry and soiled pantaloons of the church in this bright sun, because all this stuff was basically in the closet. And it really had not been exposed to the searing sun of truth. And the thing about a freedom is, when there are lurkers under the eaves, under the rafters, under the floorboards, in the attic, it is very easy to stamp down the freedoms from hidden nooks and crannies, because most of the people stamping them down are cowards.
Oh, just love something.
Sure.
Okay. We spoke, and I'll go back to this.
I'm so thirsty.
I had talked about the fact, we talked about criticism. This will be a kind of a project for future.
Sure, what?
We talked about the idea of the disingenuous critic. And I came up with two types of criticism. One which I've called dramatic criticism, and the other one where I'm kind of divided between calling it either functional or pragmatic criticism.
Nice.
Now, what I made clear was the fact that the process and the procedure of criticism is that functional aspect. It's a relationship between the observations of the critic and the judgment of the artist. Now, one of the things I think that has become a suppressive thing that I just realized is happening here on social media and in a lot of places reminds me directly of the Soviet Union, was the fact that judgment, right, was a part of the felt, judgment was something that the critic felt they had the right to bestow. Whereas in my sense, practical or functional criticism, judgment was always on the side of the artist. Now, what I mean by that
Excellent point.
What I mean by that is the idea of judgment, which is now used as a kind of an attempt to kind of pretend you actually understand what the work is about, is basically just kind of a fraudulent exercise. But in that case, it was basically a sense to like, stay in your lane, comrade. So that sense of the fact that the critic could chide or kind of give direction of this may or may not be what you have the right to be doing or the questions you have the right to ask, was something that never really seemed to be acceptable to me, but was very commonplace. Now, the reason why criticism works is it's supposed to serve the relationship between technique and reason. But it doesn't do that when it basically becomes the suppression of thought. So the idea is, in the practical or functional criticism, what you have is the relationship between observation by the critic and skeptical judgment by the artist. That was not the case of what I saw in the Soviet Union, nor what I see in a lot of places now within the institutions. And Mr. Spock, and we've said this last week, brilliantly said, the institutions are lost. And what happens is the students, 17, 18-year-old, regardless how bright they are and whatever the institutions are not capable of kind of like taking on the onslaught of ideological brainwashing. So as a result, they are not capable of kind of like sustaining themselves within the institutions. So the institutions have kind of lost their way. But the public realm still is the place where that freedom to exist can take place. So in that case, that's something I wanted to kind of say in relationship to what I remember.
Oh,
Thank you, Pete.
interesting. I have a great segue.
You have a great everything.
Thanks, Puddle. Okay. In the public realm is where Lawrence Stern was basically burned at the pyre. And this is how it happened. Do you know how I said there were two phases of Lawrence Stern's obliteration in the public eye for not just speaking his free mind, for writing his free thoughts and publishing them. Here's how he was obliterated in phase 2. And this will have your hearts and your throats, but this happened exactly like I'm going to share with you now. His most famous work is Tristram Shandy, which is, as we mentioned, but the full title, and it's very prescient here, is The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy. Now, that's a very interesting word for a book title. It's not a catchy word. It's a searing and condemning word. His opinions carried an enormous amount of weight as a clergyman. And the point is, he was an excellent clergyman. He was very trusted and he was trustworthy. He was not an attention monger. He was not a Barnum and Bailey, circus huckster. So I'm going to bring up an expression that I came up with, which I think you will absolutely love, which is the projection of guilt. Now, what I mean by that is the projection of guilt. When Tristram Shandy came out, it was an enormous success with the public. You'd think this would not be a problem. It was an enormous problem. Geometric to its popularity was the downfall of Stern because he was called, I quote, an immoral hypocrite, among other things. And that's what I mean by a projection of guilt. So the people whom he satirized were the hypocrites. He was not practicing the bawdy, lewd things in the book, but he was accused of that.
It was what again?
The projection of guilt. Stern was called an immoral hypocrite. But the point is, his satire was pointing fingers at the immoral hypocrites of the church, of the Anglican church of his day. And it was a bawdy, sexy, lewd book. It didn't mean that Stern was doing these things. So, in fact, Stern was not a hypocrite. He was a rapier observer, but often a sharp observer is tagged with the projection of guilt by those whom he is observing.
I just come up with what I would call projection of virtue, and something that I would relate to a term that I was kind of came across this week called tactical empathy. Now, in this case, it wasn't the desire of Stern to basically kind of take his career and toss it away.
No, he did not.
Now, it's different when an individual who has been benched because of poor performance and is replaced by Blaine Gabbert, who was, no, that's a real person. He was a quarterback. He was quarterback in NFL. So, but Blaine Gabbert places you
Mm.
as a guy who was probably one of the softest guys that ever played professional football.
That
But
sounds
anyway,
funny.
Blaine Gabbert replaces you when you've kind of fallen for grace.
Mhm.
And then suddenly you become a projection of virtue.
Mhm.
And, there's a difference between basically kind of taking something away from yourself because of that and saying, no, I don't mind what I sacrifice. But it's another thing to kind of sacrifice when you kind of feel as if you're pissed at the world because you're standing on the sidelines with a clipboard and Blaine Gabbert is playing in your place. So that's different. Anyway, as we're wrapping up here, what I've noticed is this was a great thing because it's kind of generated a whole bunch of other things. We have to talk about this again, but I want to kind of say quickly, one of the things, I have two things, is tolerance as emancipation, freedom as revolution. Now, again, one of the great things about this nation is we are the children of revolution. But please, the people who came and generated this place put their lives on the line and risked everything they had and would have basically been jailed so far down, it probably would have been worse than hell. These people risked everything and had a lot to lose. So
Yeah.
the reality
They had
was
everything to lose.
these children of revolution, I am a child of revolution. And that's where I think that defiant spirit comes from.
That's why I love
So
you.
if you are, talking about reform, right? Understand you're a reformer. You're
Mhm.
basically going out there, it's like, we think there's things that need to change and, we need to fix the system from within. You're a reformer.
Mhm.
But please, if you want to be a revolutionary, and I encourage anyone to live in that heroic spirit of the people who founded this great nation, when somebody puts the boot on your neck and lays you down on the pavement, don't just say, oh, I'm just a peaceful protester. Please don't hurt me. Stand up and see if you got what it takes.
Mhm.
Because this is where we started.
Mhm.
But I hear a lot of people who talk tough.
Mhm.
I just don't see a lot of people have it in them. They
Okay.
seem as if they're just kind of like,
Okay, I have a
Yeah.
final
Okay,
word,
say.
but I'm running out of time.
Yeah.
So, the harsh and subjective condemnation of critical sources like Lawrence Stern, meaning who is actually allowed to be critical, what social station or professional approval stamp will truly sanction one to speak right and act critically in the opaque eyes of society, and all too often cantilevered personal or reduced professional circumstances hamper the vital activities and freedoms and self-expression of the critical mind of the true empirical thinker.
Great. Okay, there's going to be a part 2 because we barely got started on this one.
Yeah.
There's also going to be one about freedom and revolution and tolerance and emancipation, and there'll be a second one of this. Anyway,
Yes.
next week we're going to talk about technique as generator, and that's going to be more
great.
related to kind of work. But
Yeah, I think it's nice.
yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
any 30 seconds?
Yes.
Okay.
In the last 30 seconds, and conversely, nepotism, legacy positions, inherited wealth title, they provide a power base that is bestowed on a wholly unworthy, entitled,
Yes.
imbecilic group of puppets.
Yes. In fact, we remember the Monty
Yeah.
Python sketch of the upper class twit of the year.
Oh, God, that's
Can't
the best thing
forget
that they
that.
ever
So,
did. Okay.
The realm of ideas is free to all, and it's real, and it's to the benefit of us all to keep it this way. Thank you.
Hyper precisely.
Stay free.